When a hotel maid dared to question why her late mentor's memorial had been hidden away, the powerful owner, Charles Whitman, publicly humiliated her. What he didn't know was that the young woman, Lily, carried a letter that tied her to the very man whose name he had erased. One discovery in the hotel's basement turned the balance of power upside down and forced Charles to confront the truth he'd buried. But just wait until you see how justice finally returned to the Whitman Grand and how one daughter restored a legacy thought lost forever. The service corridor of the Whitman Grand was quiet that morning, a narrow hallway lined with framed photos of past charity galas and the faint hum of air conditioning behind polished marble walls. At 7:40 a.m., Charles Whitman stepped out of the executive elevator, coffee in hand, his reflection gliding across the black tile. The hotel's owner rarely passed through this floor himself, but a board breakfast and a delayed supplier meeting had pushed him off schedule. He didn't expect anyone to be there, especially not a maid on her knees. She was polishing the bronze memorial plaque that once stood proudly in the lobby, the one dedicated to Daniel Hart, his late business partner. The plaque now hung here, half lit by a single wall sconce beside a door marked Storage Access. The young woman's uniform was neat but worn at the edges, and her name tag read simply Lily. Charles slowed, watching her wipe away a faint streak across the metal. "Excuse me," he said sharply, "what are you doing here?" Lily rose halfway, startled but calm. "Just cleaning, sir. Someone left fingerprints. I thought guests might notice." Charles frowned. Guests? There were no guests in this corridor, only staff, deliveries, and the echo of footsteps. "That's not your concern," he said. "You're assigned to the guest floors, not memorial displays." She hesitated. "Sir, I just thought, it's about Mr. Hart. People still ask where his plaque went. It used to be near the piano in the lobby. He meant a lot to the staff." Her voice was soft, respectful, but it carried a quiet conviction, the kind that didn't come from defiance, but from care. And that, more than her words, irritated him. Charles straightened his suit jacket. "You're out of line, Miss Lily, is it? We don't take operational feedback from housekeeping. If you have comments about decor placement, you can direct them to management." A few employees at the far end of the corridor froze mid-step. The sound of the buffer machine stopped. The space felt suddenly smaller. Lily swallowed. "I didn't mean to overstep. I just thought people liked seeing him remembered." Her voice was soft, respectful, but it carried a quiet conviction, the kind that didn't come from defiance, but from care. And that, more than her words, irritated him. Charles straightened his suit jacket. "You're out of line, Miss Lily, is it? We don't take operational feedback from housekeeping. If you have comments about decor placement, you can direct them to management." A few employees at the far end of the corridor froze mid-step. The sound of the buffer machine stopped. The space felt suddenly smaller. Lily swallowed. "I didn't mean to overstep. I just thought people liked seeing him remembered." Her words landed like a quiet reminder of something he didn't want to think about. Daniel's name, Daniel's face, Daniel's laugh echoing through boardrooms. Charles's jaw tensed. He looked at her again, seeing not a maid, but an interruption, a mirror of a past he had packed away. "You thought wrong," he said coldly. "You're not paid to decide what guests like. Focus on your cart. Leave company history to those who built it." The phrase hung in the air, sharp, heavy, final. Lily blinked, her composure wavering for the first time. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "With respect, sir," she said quietly, "Mr. Hart built this too." For a heartbeat, the hallway was completely silent. Even Charles seemed unsure whether he'd heard her correctly. Then, without a word, he took out his phone, opened the employee discipline app, and tapped a note. "Consider this a formal write-up," he said flatly, "for insubordination." He turned on his heel and walked toward the conference wing, his reflection shrinking with each step until it disappeared around the corner. The only sound left was the hum of the ceiling light and Lily's slow, steady breath as she knelt again.
not to polish, but to pick up the rags she had dropped. She stared at the plaque, Daniel's name, catching the light, and whispered under her breath, as if to him, "They don't remember you, but I do."
The morning confrontation lingered in Charles Whitman's mind long after he left the service corridor. The image of the maid's calm defiance, the way she looked at him without fear, replayed behind his eyelids during the entire board meeting. He tried to focus on the projections glowing across the glass table, expansion budgets, occupancy charts, investor slides polished to sterile perfection. But every time someone mentioned the Whitman Hart legacy, a small pulse of unease flared in his chest. The hotel had been Daniel's idea first, Daniel with his messy optimism and habit of treating janitors like guests of honor. They'd built the Whitman Grand on handshake deals, endless nights, and the kind of faith that turned a city block of old brick into a monument of glass. And then, one late night 18 months ago, Daniel's car spun off a rain-slick highway on his way back from a donor dinner. The official report called it an accident. The board called it a tragic loss. Charles never called it anything. He simply folded the grief into his calendar and moved the next morning's meeting 15 minutes earlier. Since then, pressure had been tightening around him like a vice. The merger with a luxury chain demanded brand modernization, consultant jargon for erasing everything that gave the Whitman Grand a soul. The old oak desks Daniel loved were replaced with steel and glass. The jazz trio in the lobby was replaced with curated playlists. Even the plaque, that simple bronze rectangle engraved with "In memory of Daniel Hart, co-founder and friend," had been relocated to the side corridor for visual balance. Charles had agreed, telling himself it was for the good of the brand. But every time he passed the empty wall near the lobby piano, something inside him stung, not grief exactly, but guilt's quieter cousin. He'd been the one to push Daniel to attend that late meeting. He'd been the one who said, "Take your own car, I'll meet you there." When the call came hours later, he'd stared at the flashing phone until it stopped. He still remembered the sound of rain hitting the window that night, relentless and even, like applause for a play he didn't want to finish. He despised loose ends, and the plaque was one. It reminded him of the side of Daniel that was all heart, all faith, the side Charles had learned to trim away in boardrooms and negotiations. He had convinced himself that sentiment was weakness, that emotion had no place in business. But lately he wasn't sure if he had preserved the company or simply hollowed it out. Lily Monroe had no interest in boardrooms or mergers. She cared about one thing: finding out why her mother's last words about Daniel Hart still didn't make sense. She had taken the housekeeping job at the Whitman Grand not for the pay, but for access. Every department keycard opened another piece of the building's memory: storage rooms, service archives, maintenance records. To anyone else, it was just a job. To her, it was archaeology. She was digging for something buried. Her mother, Claire, had once worked there as a banquet server. For years, she'd spoken of Daniel Hart as a rare kind of man, generous without spectacle, humble to a fault. Claire used to say he remembered names, even when no one else did. But she never talked about why she left the hotel so suddenly, or why her eyes darkened every time she heard Charles Whitman's name. After Claire's passing, Lily found a steel box in a closet, tucked behind old photo albums and an unpaid water bill. Inside were only a few items, but they rearranged everything Lily thought she knew. There was a Polaroid of Daniel Hart, smiling awkwardly, holding a newborn baby. The handwriting on the back read simply, "Lily, your father's proudest day." There was also a hotel envelope, its letterhead faintly yellowed, containing a folded receipt from a storage facility registered under the Whitman Grand's name. And beneath that, a single handwritten note. The ink faded, the paper creased from being handled too many times. "If anything happens, talk to Charles. He will do right." Lily had stared at that line until her eyes blurred. The name Charles meant nothing good to her. She remembered the stories, the ambition, the control, the way people described him with respect that tasted like fear.
Yet Daniel's handwriting was steady and certain. He will do right. The contradiction gnawed at her. What had Daniel expected Charles to do right about? And why had no one ever told her mother what that meant? She took the housekeeping job 2 months later. Every floor became part of her quiet investigation. Each hallway, each storage room, each dusty archive file carried whispers of the man whose memory the hotel had nearly erased. She noticed how older staff still said Mr. Hart would have liked that when something kind happened, or how the concierge kept a framed photo of the founders hidden behind his desk. There was warmth in those fragments, a warmth the polished marble of the new Whitman Grand had long since buried. She didn't plan to challenge anyone. She wasn't there for revenge or recognition. She just wanted to understand why a man who believed in fairness had trusted someone who had buried his name. And that was how their paths crossed that morning, one man running from memory and one young woman walking straight toward it. Neither of them knew that a simple question, "Why was this moved?" would pull both their lives out of balance. For Charles, it would reopen the door he'd locked 18 months ago. For Lily, it would be the first crack of light breaking through years of silence, leading her closer to the truth she wasn't sure she wanted to find. In the quiet heart of a grand hotel, motives gathered like dust, invisible but everywhere.
By noon, the story of the corridor incident had already made its way through the hotel grapevine. Housekeeping whispered about it near the laundry presses. Front desk staff mentioned it in low tones between check-ins. "Mr. Whitman lost it on a maid," someone said. "She talked back," another added. And just like that, Lily became a rumor before lunch. When she was called into human resources, the office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and printer toner. A clipboard waited on the desk, a sheet already typed and ready for her signature. The HR manager, a thin woman with perfect posture, didn't look angry, only efficient. "Lily, this is a formal notice," she said, sliding the paper forward. "Final warning. The stated reason, insubordination, negative impact on guest perception." Lily scanned the words slowly. "Guest perception?" she asked quietly. The manager avoided her eyes. "When employees raise their voices in guest-accessible areas, it reflects poorly on the brand." "I didn't raise my voice," Lily said. "I understand, but it's not about what happened, it's about how it looked." That sentence landed like a closing door. Lily picked up the pen, signed the form, and placed it neatly back on the desk. Her hands didn't tremble. "May I have 15 minutes to show the general manager something?" she asked. "It's about Mr. Hart." The HR manager blinked. "Mr. Hart?" "Archive Storage B," Lily continued. "There's something there I think the hotel should see." The GM, a brisk man in his 40s who specialized in avoiding problems, appeared in the doorway just in time to overhear her. "Storage? That area's restricted. If you have a facilities issue, file it through maintenance." "I'm not reporting damage," Lily said. "I found a receipt in the hotel's name from before the merger. I think Mr. Hart." "Enough." His tone sharpened. "You're on final warning, not a treasure hunt." And that was when Charles Whitman walked by. He had been heading toward the executive wing, phone pressed to his ear, mid-conversation with a board member. But the sound of Hart's name stopped him cold. He lowered the phone. "What's this?" he asked. The GM straightened instantly. "Just a misunderstanding. Miss Monroe here believes she's uncovered something in storage," Lily finished for him. "I'd like to show it to management." Charles's expression was carved from stone. "Whatever story you're selling, I'm not buying," he said quietly. "Go clean room 2410. It's overdue." He turned away before she could respond. The decision was final, the hierarchy restored. At least, it should have been. Room 2410 was on the top floor, a suite with glass walls overlooking the harbor. It also happened to have the service lift that descended straight to the basement, to Archive Storage B. Lily's pulse quickened as she rolled her cleaning cart into the suite. The room was immaculate. The previous guest had checked out that morning. She didn't touch the bed sheets or the minibar. Instead, she crossed to the far wall, unlocked the maintenance panel with her master key, and stepped inside the narrow service lift. As the doors closed, her reflection flickered in the metal, small, determined, steady. The basement was cooler than the rest of the building, the air thick with dust and the low hum of ventilation fans. Rows of storage cages stretched into dimness, each labeled with faded tags. Archive B, Founders Files, Closed Access. She found the cage number that matched the old receipt from her mother's steel box. The clerk behind the counter, an older man with reading glasses, squinted at her badge. "That's executive access," he said. "I'm here on maintenance verification," she lied softly. "Room 2410 reported a missing item tied to Mr. Hart's archive." He hesitated, looked her up and down, then sighed. "5 minutes. Don't touch anything not on your list." She nodded, of course. The cage door creaked open. Inside, under a sheet of dust, sat a small metal locker, Hart/Private. Her key slipped easily into the lock pad. The click echoed faintly in the quiet. Inside were 2 things, a banker's envelope sealed with wax and a small velvet pouch the color of dark wine. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter on hotel stationery, the handwriting unmistakably Daniel Hart's, broad, looping, confident. A notarized stamp dated 2 years prior sealed the bottom. "To be given to my daughter Lillian Claire Hart upon her 21st birthday or my passing, whichever comes first." Lily stared at the name, her name, spelled in the same ink that had once written her mother's paychecks. Her throat tightened. The edges of the paper felt almost warm. She unfolded the letter further and saw a second sheet beneath it, a list of trustees, with Charles Whitman's name printed clearly beside Daniel's signature. In the velvet pouch, she found a single gold cufflink. The initials DH were engraved on the front. On the back, smaller but precise, were 2 letters, CW, and below them 3 words, "Keep the Faith." She pressed her lips together to keep from crying. He hadn't forgotten. He had planned for her. And somehow, Charles Whitman had known. When Lily returned to the service floor, Charles was waiting with security by the elevator. His expression was calm, almost polite, but his eyes were sharp. "He's done," he said. "Hand over your badge." She didn't argue. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the letter, and placed it gently on a nearby table beneath the overhead light. "Before I do," she said, "you might want to read this." He hesitated, the first crack in his composure all day. He picked up the letter, scanned a few lines, and went utterly still. His hand lowered slowly. Color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "From the basement," Lily said evenly. "The one you told me I shouldn't care about." He looked up sharply, confusion flashing to disbelief. "Who are you?" She held his gaze. "My mother's name was Claire Monroe. She worked here years ago. You sponsored her night classes." Charles blinked, memory flickering in his eyes. Claire Monroe. He said it like a ghost he hadn't expected to hear. "Then your last name, Monroe," she said. "My legal one, but my father's?" She tapped the envelope still in his hand, "was Hart." For a long moment, no one moved. The hum of the hallway lights filled the silence between them. Charles looked down at the cufflink, glinting inside the pouch, the engraving he himself had commissioned years ago as a gift. "Keep the Faith." It hit him like a memory unburied, Daniel's laugh, the promise they'd made, the drive that never ended. And standing before him was the living proof that faith hadn't been kept. The pattern of denial, of control, of silence cracked in that moment, and the truth at last began to breathe. The executive boardroom of the Whitman Grand had never felt smaller. The long glass table reflected the overhead lights. The skyline stretched beyond the windows like a painted illusion of order. But inside the room, the air was dense. Too many voices speaking softly about damage control, legacy, and liability. An emergency meeting had been called within the hour. Charles Whitman sat at the head of the table, the folded letter from Daniel Hart resting in front of him like evidence from another lifetime. Around him, the general manager, the HR director, 2 board members patched in via video, and the hotel's outside counsel, a man who had been interrupted mid-golf game, still wearing a pale polo shirt under his blazer. The letter was passed around. Eyes darted across the pages. Paper rustled like a nervous heartbeat. It was all there, in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. He had established a private trust, naming Lillian Claire Hart as the rightful beneficiary of a modest but meaningful share in the Whitman Grand Holdings. And he had appointed Charles as contingent trustee, the one responsible for ensuring Daniel's daughter received what was hers, if Daniel couldn't do it himself. There was also an addendum, unsigned but witnessed, a simple request that if Daniel were to die before his daughter turned 21, Charles should find her and do right by her. The last phrase glowed under the table lamp like an accusation. Charles read it twice, then a third time, as though repetition could turn it into a misunderstanding. His hand was steady, but his jaw tightened with every line. Around him, murmurs began, numbers, percentages, liability terms. The conversation tried to shift away from what it meant toward how to contain it. Counsel cleared his throat. "These dates are interesting," he said delicately. 2 years before Mr. Hart's passing, and yet there's no record of this trust in the merger files. "Where did it go?" asked one of the board members on screen. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "My guess? During the consolidation process, legacy documents were filtered for duplication. Anything requiring legal verification may have been moved into pending status. If it wasn't verified before the final merger, it may have been omitted." "Omitted," Charles repeated quietly, the words sour in his mouth. They spent an hour piecing together fragments of bureaucracy, cross-referencing storage receipts, personnel changes, and merger timelines. At the center of it all was a single name, Douglas Rayner, the former CFO. He had overseen document optimization during the merger, a polite phrase for deciding which pieces of history stayed and which disappeared. He'd since left the company with a consulting bonus and glowing references. Charles's fingers pressed against the bridge of his nose. He had signed off on those reports. He had wanted clean lines, no sentimental clutter. He had told himself it was efficiency. Now it felt like erasure. Across the table, Lily sat quietly. She hadn't spoken since she was escorted in by security, though she didn't look afraid. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, almost detached, as if she were observing rather than participating. When the conversation turned toward damage mitigation, she finally spoke. "This isn't about damage," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through the room. "It's about remembering who you built this place for." All eyes turned to her. The HR director shifted uncomfortably. The lawyer began to rephrase something about confidential matters, but Lily kept going. "My mother, Claire Monroe, worked here 15 years ago. She served tables at charity galas Mr. Hart hosted. He helped her enroll in night school. She never finished because she got pregnant. With me. She never told anyone who my father was, not even me. But she kept this box, with his picture and his note and that storage receipt. She said one day I'd understand." Her gaze flicked to Charles, who hadn't moved since she began. His eyes were fixed on the letter, but he wasn't reading anymore. He was listening to the voice he'd silenced for too long. "When she died," Lily continued, "I came here because I wanted to know who he was. Everyone talked about Daniel Hart like he was a legend. I didn't come for money or a title or ownership. I just wanted to see what kind of place he built and why his name disappeared from it." Her tone was factual, not pleading. That made it harder to deflect. The lawyer cleared his throat again. "Miss Monroe, or Miss Hart, I'm afraid matters like this are sensitive. Until we verify the authenticity of these documents, I must advise you not to discuss them outside this room, for confidentiality reasons. Charles shut his eyes. The word confidentiality felt like a blade twisting between his ribs. It was the same word used when Daniel's accident became a press release, when the memorial was relocated, when grief was filed under operational adjustments. He'd spent a year building walls of professionalism, neat, airtight, unfeeling, and now every word in Daniel's handwriting tore a hole through them. He exhaled, long and uneven. The hum of the air vent filled the silence. "I didn't know," he said at last, his voice almost too quiet. Lily didn't answer right away. Her expression softened, just slightly. "Maybe," she said, "but you didn't look either." For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the city outside seemed to pause. The board members on the screen exchanged silent glances. The HR director lowered her eyes. The lawyer began stacking his papers in a neat pile, a reflex to avoid eye contact. Charles looked up finally, meeting Lily's gaze. "You asked me this morning why the plaque was moved," he said. "It wasn't because I forgot him. It was because I couldn't stand seeing what he left behind." "That's the same thing," Lily said quietly. Her words struck with the gentle precision of truth. Charles leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, the sound of the city below faint and distant. Car horns, footsteps, ordinary life continuing while his own sense of control disintegrated. In that glass-walled boardroom, surrounded by people he paid to manage outcomes, he realized there was no managing this. Grief, guilt, legacy, they had found their way in despite every locked door. And they were speaking now, in Daniel's handwriting and his daughter's voice. The room, usually sterile, practical, transactional, had become something else entirely. A place where echoes finally answered back. The lawyers wanted to settle quietly. They proposed the usual: confidentiality agreements, sealed archives, and a press release stripped of emotion. Charles Whitman could have signed it all and closed the door on the past for good. But when he looked at Daniel's letter, creased, smudged, alive with old ink, he realized silence was just another form of hiding. And hiding was what had brought him here. He refused the silent route. Not out of sudden heroism, but from the same bone-deep fear that had made him lash out at Lily that morning. The fear that he had become the kind of man Daniel would no longer recognize. That afternoon, he sent a message through every internal channel of the hotel. Mandatory all-staff meeting, 5 p.m., ballroom. Attendance required. No one knew what it was about. The gossip spun in circles. Layoffs, rebranding, a new investor. By 5, the ballroom was full. Dishwashers still in aprons, receptionists in uniform, concierge lined near the back, housekeepers standing shoulder to shoulder beside managers. The lights were dimmed except for the small stage where Charles usually handed out plaques and bonuses. This time, he stood there alone, holding no notes, only a microphone that crackled when he breathed. He took a moment to scan the crowd. The faces that made the Whitman Grand actually work. The ones he passed daily without ever really seeing. "I was wrong this morning," he began. The room fell absolutely still. "I disrespected a member of our team for speaking up about what matters here," he continued, voice steady but low. "The truth is, I didn't want to face what I lost and what I owe." He paused, looking toward the front row. Lily stood there, small in her gray uniform, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Charles's voice softened. "Miss Monroe, Miss Hart, Lily, this hotel has a responsibility to you, and I have a responsibility to Daniel's memory." A murmur swept through the room. Everyone knew the name, though few had ever spoken it aloud in recent years. He straightened,
his tone shifting from confession to action. Effective immediately, the Hart Scholarship Fund will be reinstated, fully endowed, managed by an independent board. Miss Hart will serve as its co-chair. He let the words settle before continuing. The trust established by Mr. Hart has been formally recognized. Its assets will be transferred as he intended, and a forensic audit has been ordered to locate every document that was lost or removed during the merger. He glanced down for a moment, then back at the crowd. "This isn't charity," he said quietly. "It's correction, long overdue." A ripple of emotion moved through the room. Shock, respect, disbelief. No one clapped. They just listened. Then, with no announcement, he lifted the microphone from the stand, stepped down from the stage, and handed it to the head of maintenance. "Have a cart brought to the lobby," he said. "We're moving something back." That night, long after the guests had gone up to their rooms and the staff had returned to work, Charles rolled the bronze plaque, Daniel's plaque, out of the corridor and back into the center of the lobby. The dolly squeaked across marble floors as he worked the bolts loose himself. When it was done, he stepped back. The bronze gleamed again under the warm light, right where it had once belonged, beside the piano Daniel loved. Lily stood at a distance, watching. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and she didn't offer it. That wasn't what this was about. Later, when the ballroom lights were dim and the noise of the city softened through the glass doors, Lily walked alone down the same corridor where the morning's humiliation had begun. The floor still smelled faintly of polish. The plaque's absence had left a square of cleaner marble, like a healed scar. She leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly, the weight of years leaving her body. From her pocket, she drew the gold cufflink, the one engraved DH, and on the back, CW, Keep the Faith. Then she touched the folded letter inside her uniform, the one written in her father's hand. For a moment, the silence felt sacred. She didn't cry in the ballroom. She saved her tears for here, for this quiet, ordinary hallway that had held both her lowest moment and her first taste of truth. When Charles joined her minutes later, he didn't speak right away. He looked at the plaque in the lobby, then back toward the empty corridor. "You were right," he said softly. "It never belonged in the dark." She nodded. "If you want me on that scholarship board," she said, her voice calm but firm, "we're going to start with policies that protect staff who speak up. And the housekeeping team deserves a voice in safety meetings. That's non-negotiable." Charles gave a small nod. No argument, no grand speech. Just a quiet, deliberate agreement. A man choosing, for once, to keep the faith he'd once engraved into gold. The next morning, hotel guests noticed something different as they crossed the lobby. The bronze plaque caught the morning light again, freshly polished, now with a new line etched beneath Daniel Hart's name. "Generosity is a decision you make when nobody is watching." People paused to read it. A few smiled. Some staff wiped their eyes before turning back to work. The space felt lighter, as if the building itself had taken a breath it had been holding for too long. Justice hadn't come as a headline. It had come quietly, through humility, truth, and a daughter standing where she was always meant to be. And somewhere in that stillness, the anger that had flared at dawn faded into something sturdier. Not revenge, but balance. For the first time in years, the world inside the Whitman Grand felt right side up.